Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, who will tell us how India did in 2022. Sir, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining in. And
Good
I'm
afternoon,
looking.
Jai Hind. Adi, let me start by expressing my happiness on appearing on your show again after a fairly long time. I've been playing truant, but I'm back, and hopefully we'll have a great session today.
Nice to know that, sir. And the theme of the session is, of course, we need to find out how did India do in 2022? What has happened? How have we changed our position in the world? And I don't really have a set theme, and I just wanted to basically see where this discussion goes. And of course, the viewers who will tell us and ask a certain amount of questions. But, sir, to begin with, this has been a geopolitically very, very active year. A great year for analysts like myself and experts like yourself for looking at the situation, figuring out what's happening, and actually analyzing the way forward into the future. How would you like to open this very interesting conversation, sir?
Adi, for me, the best thing which happened this year was the World Cup in Qatar. And it gave a tremendous amount of happiness to us all of us who are fans of sports, fans of football. Football is a great unifier, it unifies the greatest of enemies. And I think it was a great success. So let me start by at least putting that on record that the Qatar World Cup, despite all the apprehensions we had about the possibility of it being run efficiently, etc., were laid to rest, and thankfully it went off very well. And our compliments to Argentina for having won it. Having said that, this was a year which was 2 years after the pandemic, 2020, 2021, where the pandemic. The pandemic was a once in a century event, and obviously it would leave behind a tremendous impact. This is something like the First World War in the 20th century, the Second World War in the 20th century, the Cold War, which lasted for the better part of 40 years. So it was expected that there would be a major impact, and not only in the social and economic environment, but in the overall geopolitical environment as such. And it happened that way. You found that the world was struggling. Most nations were economically down. Uh, Even the richer countries were not so well off. They were struggling in maintaining the impact of the pandemic. China, on one hand, had a completely different strategy of managing it, and we've seen what the effect of that has been. We saw the Western model, and we saw that at the end of it, the Indian model actually worked, and it worked pretty well. The fact that we remain a nation today, which is at, well, somewhere 6.5% growth or something today, shows that we have bounced back from a minus 24% to a minus 7% to a 6.5% plus, which is, I think, a huge commentary on the management of the political, the social, and the economic impact of an event as big as the pandemic. And to that end, compliments to the nation, compliments to the government of India, compliments to the people of India for having achieved that. We've seen many nations around the world have not been able to achieve that. That's something we need to pat ourselves about. Having said that, a new world order was set to emerge of around this time, for no other reason except that geopolitically 2 years you found where a period in which the pandemic came were also cusp years in which Afghanistan, you found things happening in Afghanistan. That was the core, that was the crucial area of the world where a lot of things were happening even during the pandemic. And that's the period when from where the Americans withdrew, hopefully looking at moving towards the Indo-Pacific. But despite all those efforts, despite their efforts to try and stabilize the Middle East, you found that it was East Europe, the least respected area, where war broke out. Now, someone may question me and said, why would you say least expected? After all, 2014 onwards, the Russians were fighting a hybrid war in uh, in the general area of Ukraine, in the in the area of Crimea, Donbass, etc. Yes, it was a hybrid war. It was a hybrid war which was going on, but to translate that into a conventional high intensity war of the kind which is taking place today was something which was not expected. 2022 surprised everyone with the decision of President Putin to go to war. We have discussed this for a very, very long time in many programs and shows, and we've seen that this was perhaps a result of miscalculations. And the Russians miscalculated their ability to complete this war, to achieve victory. They thought it would be a very short victory. It would be a very short war. Victory was at their feet, and they would be able to bargain, argue, negotiate on the conference table. The NATO, on the other hand, felt that they could resist this. They could isolate Russia and economically put it down with sanctions, making it unsustainable for Russia to be able to pursue this war. Both sides miscalculated. And that is the result why you're finding this war continuing today on the 30th of December 2022. Unfortunately. Where did India come into this? India plays its hands well, I thought, much against what the perception which is prevailing in within India also that we should have taken sides, or we should have expressed our readiness to sort of back whichever party we were backing. But I think India played the right cards. With the Russians, we could not have left the the relationship we had with them, the historic relationship we had with them. With the Americans, we had a developing strategic relationship. With NATO, of course, we don't know what the future role of NATO is going to be, probably in the Indo-Pacific itself. So there's no way India needs Russia for its hardware, for its weapon programs, for its political backing. It needs the United States for its technologies, for its trade, for various other social requirements, for education. And therefore, I think we went along reading the situation, not trying to jump into something without understanding it fully. It's only sometime in September that Prime Minister Modi finally made a commitment, not a commitment, made an opinion. And he expressed that opinion very, very subtly, very correctly, in very measured words. And I thought that was rather well done. It has not it has not attracted the attention which it deserved, although it did attract attention. But I think those words are going to make a difference in the future. And India may possibly be proactively, probably consider 2022 as a base year in which perhaps for the first time its own international geopolitical stature rose to the level where its prime minister's words are being respected in this manner, and possibly you can even look upon India as one of those intermediaries who could set up some kind of a negotiation between the warring parties in the future. It may never happen, but the potential remains. And I do still believe very strongly that in the next 8 to 10 weeks, something big will happen in which India will have a role to play. So that's as far as two major issues I've spoken about: the pandemic, Ukraine, India's role in both of them, economics, the social aspect, neighborhood, etc. We may like to discuss in your subsequent questions.
Absolutely. I think this is the biggest geopolitical event, or is, as it's sold to us, that it is. And I mean, it's impacting the rest of the world, as a matter of fact. And every time we go to the gas station and fill up fuel, we do feel the beat of what is happening in Europe. But let's come back towards the India-China part of it. So let's analyze how that has gone. Um, there was a very icy meeting in Samarkand, and there was, I won't call it warm, but there was an interaction between the two leaders in Bali, and of course the Yangtze standoff. How do you see the India-China relationship which is fared out in 2022?
I think China is extremely wary of India. It did not expect uh, India to be a worthy competitor and someone which was a nation which was looking for a strategic space in Asia and perhaps in the near future a strategic space in the world. For China, it was all a question of the United States. Uh, it may be a little premature on my part. A lot of commentators, analysts may say that I'm being extremely, should I say, unrealistic of putting India in the same category as the United States. I'm looking at India as the potential future. China looks at everything in terms of 15, 20, 30 years. And that's the time frame I think that China is looking at India and hoping that it can put off this rise of India, which is happening. The rise of India can put it off. It hasn't thought through this, and its strategy is still emerging, evolving. What happened in 2020 was a wolf warrior kind of action, which really the Chinese hadn't thought it through to what the final impact, the second order or third order impact of its actions would really be. Uh, we have seen that India militarily has stood on its own um, in the incidents in 2020, in 2022, recently in Arunachal. Again, we stood realistically and ensured that militarily we were not bullied in any particular way. The Sino-Indian relation continues to remain icy, and I don't see anything positive developing in the next 1 2 years. This is primarily because of the huge trust deficit, and as I said, the Chinese suspicion about India's potential, and it's the feasibility of India teaming up with two of its strongest competitors, who are really its adversaries, and those are the United States and Japan. Both form a part of the Quad, which, too much to China's apprehensions, is emerging well, although 2022 hasn't seen the best of the Quad because much of the focus has been on Ukraine. But perhaps 2023, if the Ukraine war takes a slight backstep, you may find that the next steps are all going to be primarily in the Indo Pacific. So, having said that, I think 2022 was a year in which the Sino Indian relationship was at a standstill. In, uh, in the military parlance of the Indian army, we always say, Jaise the, jahan par hain, wherever you are, right? So we have just been stuck at that place. We haven't moved on, despite the fact that heads of government, Mr. Modi, Xi Jinping, have met in Uzbekistan, and subsequently the relationship hasn't been very warm. Uh, Despite that, it's also not been very negative as such. Our trade has continued. What the Chinese are probably very apprehensive about is the fact that we have handled the COVID very, very professionally, the pandemic very professionally, and therefore the effect of the pandemic on India has been comparatively much lesser than what it has been on China. And the effect on China is continuing even till today, as we are all aware. So 2022 is a year of standstill. We have not improved our relationship, neither have we. Has the relationship really deteriorated in any way? There has been tension on the borders, but there hasn't been a real, uh, coming to blows with maces and sticks, etc., is now a new normal. But really, there hasn't been a contact. Patrols haven't fired at each other. As long as that has not happened, I think the new normal can still continue and give us the scope to examine this relationship deeper and see what else can the two countries do to try and reduce, ameliorate some of the trust deficit, and hope that we can build up on whatever is the existing relationship today and improve upon it for the better of the future.
That's interesting. So I must say that's a a very different perspective as far as the Chinese lookout for India is concerned. You mentioned that they didn't think this through, and a lot of the guys that are watching right now, I'm sure, have gone through a lot of the analysis on Yangtze, on Dev Talks, and many other platforms. I think this is a very very fresh perspective, and I would obviously like to drill you further on that, but I want to move a little bit on towards our west. How do you look at the dealings of India with Pakistan and Afghanistan in that region? And I'm going to club them both because I kind of find that it's kind of under one umbrella today. So it's not a we would discuss Afghanistan and Pakistan separately. Today, I think we are at a point of time we would say AFPAC. How do you see how we've dealt with AFPAC and your
Let me
analysis?
start with Afghanistan. I think the decision of the government of India to engage with the Taliban was a very, very welcome decision. Uh, you see, you can sit on your high horse and continue to say that we will change things in Afghanistan with our very strong ethical attitude, etc. It's not going to lead you anywhere. Uh, Small, low level engagements, like, for example, the return, we haven't officially opened our embassy there. We haven't recognized Afghanistan, but yet we are engaging. We are engaging with the Taliban. We've got some people back there in the embassy at the moment who opened it up and are continuing their parleys with the government, with certain officials in the government. We are going back to restoring some of our soft power projects. We spent almost $2.5 billion there. We invested there, and we are hoping to be able to now put in some more money and help the Taliban government. With that help, we hope that we can overcome some of our differences and come closer to each other. You are seeing that the Afghan Taliban relationship with Pakistan is no great shakes at the moment. And we have seen standoffs at the borders. We've seen issues on the terrorist front and things like that. I'm sure the Taliban knows what is the potential of India for the future. It knows the kind of economy that we have and the kind of respect that we have in the rest of the world. And I think they've been very pragmatic in also opening up to a great extent and reaching out to us. So this is a small beginning, a very small beginning, but I think it took a lot of courage on the part of government of India to have even reached out in this manner and promised economic aid to Afghanistan. Otherwise, the easiest thing is to just shut yourself out and say black and white until the Taliban improves its attitude, unless it comes back to its whole the entire thing that the world is demanding on the gender sensitivity, etc. We will have nothing to do with the Taliban government. I don't think that's the right approach and attitude. The method we are following now is the correct way. Pakistan. We must see this in perspective, and we must see this in the light of the fact that next year is going to be most likely an election year in Pakistan. Now, this last year, you've seen the better part of the year uh, with Imran Khan having gone, the new government having come in, the fights internally which have been taking place in the political environment, the army which has its own dynamics of its own power, its ability to control things politically. All this has been in the melting pot. Very, very interesting for any Pakistan observer. The whole year has been a very interesting year. We were hoping that Imran Khan's acidity, his vitriolic attitude towards India uh, would probably change once from the Pakistan government perspective, once the new government is in place. But we find that people like Bilawal Bhutto, of all people, seems to continue doing the same without looking at the impact of all this, not realizing that what they really need is internal stability. They need they need an improvement of their economic environment. They need to build bridges all around. Who can they build bridges with better than with India in terms of the economic requirement? If if trade with India is restored, how much benefit can come to the people of Pakistan? that they don't somehow realize this. They always seem to be looking at China. They seem to be looking at the Middle East. They seem to be looking at the United States. A big thing which has happened this year, of course, is that the United States has come back to support Pakistan. Support means the realization has come in the United States that they cannot do without Pakistan, and that's because of Pakistan's geostrategic location, as we are aware of. Uh, we in India will always, of course, object. We will point out to the United States and the rest of the world that Pakistan is the core center of international terror. They are the supporters of proxy war in India, in Jammu and Kashmir in particular. But all this, for the last 30 years, but no country in the world still seems to be accepting these arguments on our part and continues to support Pakistan. That's primarily, once again, because of the geostrategic location. So, having said that, it's a good thing that the ceasefire on the line of control has been intact through the year. We hope that in 2023 this continues, but with the elections coming, with the instability in the political environment of Pakistan, I'm not sure whether the Pakistan government, the army, would like a quiet line of control or would like an active line of control, would like to put the blame game on different people here and there. Something awkward is bound to happen. It's not that as if the elections are going to be without any tension and without any issues of this kind. So this is something that we should look to and probably expect that it will happen. The last thing on Pakistan, which I must keep saying, which I keep saying everywhere, and which I must flag, is that in India we should be concerned about the climate issues and the threats to Pakistan's population coming from disaster related situations and climate. We've seen 2.3 million refugees coming out of the floods which took place in the Indus and the western region, etc. We have seen they have lost something to the tune of $30 billion, and some assesses at even $40 billion. In a nation which is looking for a $9 billion loan from the IMF, to lose 30 to $40 billion due to floods and other disasters is something more disastrous than anything else. So, if this continues repetitively in the future, you can expect that there will be migration of population.
Hmm.
And I fear that that migration may take place, obviously, will not take place towards Afghanistan or Iran, will probably take place towards India. And that's going to be a very, very dangerous thing for us. We need to keep this in mind and we need to keep engaged with the Pakistan government, the United Nations, in the different agencies of the United Nations, and the international community in general. Lastly, as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, lots of people are ringing me up to tell me in the last 3, 4, 5 days all this is happening. Is this a return once again to Pakistan's activism? I say yes, a temporary activism. Pakistan has to, the security and intelligence community in Pakistan has to also survive. So they will continue doing this kind of a thing, sponsoring all this kind of a thing. It's not something that we cannot handle. We've handled it well, I think, so far. And I think we need not be worried by the turn of events which have taken place in the last 3, 4 days in Jammu and Kashmir.
Indeed, so I think that's a very wise outlook because a lot of people do get scared, and evidently so, and that's fine. I think that's very natural. That's good because that tells us that more people are aware of the situation which is happening around us. So I want to give a global perspective, but before that, a line each for our smaller but not inconsequential neighbor. They're, I think, very consequential neighbors: Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Myanmar. Of course, Bangladesh has certain issues as well, where the relations seem to be on a sort of a balance. But Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Myanmar seems to require a certain more effort from our side, which will complete the neighborhood. And post which, I'd like you to kind of also I'll ask you a question about the global affairs and where do we stand.
I'll be very brief on this. All three nations are very, very important nations for us. The neighborhood is always far more important than the what is called the near abroad region or the further region. Sri Lanka, I think India has handled it reasonably well in terms of the aid, beating everyone else to the aid, making Sri Lanka, looking after Sri Lanka's interests. We see that many other nations, probably richer nations, have not come forward in that manner. Somehow Sri Lanka doesn't seem to be making a difference strategically to many nations around the world. Even the Chinese haven't given that kind of a have not adopted that kind of an approach to Sri Lanka. I'm happy that India does not look at competition in this, but looks upon it as a natural interest for our country.
Hmm.
It's an Sri Lanka is in a very, very crucial geostrategic location. We share a part of the population ethnically with Sri Lanka. We have been 3 years in a operation in Sri Lanka, so we learned a lot from that experience itself, and we know the potential of Sri Lanka and its internal problems causing problems for us internally in southern India. We saw the April 18th, 2019 incident in which the ISIS was involved, etc. So I think we have been sensible. We've gone about it carefully. We've been in contact with the right people. So no more on that, really saying. We have to be careful. We have to be careful that in Sri Lanka, things surprise us many times. The 18th April 2019 incidents on Good Friday, or it was on Easter,
Yes,
did
sir.
take us by surprise completely. And the fact that we had an ISIS network of this kind functioning in Coimbatore and other portions of Tamil Nadu, etc., should have been something which should have been much more under our surveillance than what it was. Having said that, Bangladesh, to my mind, with what's happening in Arunachal, what's happening on the northern borders, etc., Bangladesh is a very, very important country. I'm very glad that we've just signed some very important infrastructure projects with them only 2 days ago. And this seems to be something which is a work in progress continuously with them. We must sign many such more projects, our economic cooperation with them, um, concessions that if we have to give on the sharing of waters, boundaries, etc., all that must be pursued with single-minded focus. Because I don't think many people in India realize how important a country Bangladesh is for us. Uh, but the political orientation within Bangladesh is also something of our concern. There are many uh, parties which are not very friendly towards India. We are fortunate that for the last many years, the orientation of Bangladesh has been in our favor. And because of that, we've been able to build up this relationship. But it's more important to look at the future and wonder how will we nurture this relationship further if we don't find the right political orientation among the parties which are going to be in power in the future. No one can dictate, no one can guarantee which these parties are going to be.
Correct.
This is something we need to war game on much more within India, politically, strategically, economically, than anything else. Nepal, change of government having taken place now, this whole business of a pro China orientation, this is something which will have to be taken stock of. It's not as if Nepal ever sort of pushes for going whole hog towards its northern neighbor or goes completely against its southern neighbor. It remains stuck somewhere in the middle all the time. Perhaps that is it's a kind of a strategy to extract the maximum from either side. But having said that, I think it's a natural thing. Historically, ethnically, I may not be, but historically, definitely, uh, from an angle of strategic interests, etc., which Nepal has followed over a long period of time. Obviously, an orientation in favor of India has been to its benefit, But ever since China became an economic powerhouse, became a economic superpower, obviously the capability of China to invest in Nepal has been much, much higher.
Much. Hmm.
So, having said all this, we need to continue our relationship, pursuing a strong relationship with Nepal, particularly through the economic route, making sure that we uh, do not look at the situation of the Nepalese government and its decision making in terms of black and white, because you'll find that many of the decisions that the Nepalese government will take will be in the shades of gray, which will may favor the other side and may not favor us. Let's take that with a pinch of salt and work on them instead of being taking umbrage to everything which perhaps happens, which is against our interest right at the outset. We can build up on those and try and improve that and neutralize many of the negatives which emerge through those decisions of the Nepalese government. These are all very, very important nations for us. We haven't touched upon Maldives. Maldives is again equally important, and we need to pursue that relationship with the Maldives too.
Thank you, sir. But there are of course challenges lay in our neighborhood, and as you've elucidated that there are miles to go before we sleep within our neighborhood. Having said that, sir, on the global platform, there is a voice that has emerged, which is the Indian voice. May not be a fully developed sort of a voice that one would want to see, but it is far beyond what a lot of us actually expected or even thought about probably at the end of 2021, that at somewhere in the middle of 22 India would be able to literally stand on its own self and make its own stand felt across the world. A lot of countries stood by us. A lot of countries you could realize was standing behind us and saying, okay, if a big country like that is going to stand and say, take its stand and on its own interests, so are we. That is an interesting development to me, sir. How do you would you agree with me, or how do you look at it?
See, Adi, we need not be in a hurry to draw conclusions on that.
Mm,
I do think this is something which works over time. You
indeed.
have to, there are a combination of factors which come into this and contribute towards it. One of the very important factors is economic.
Mm,
And mercifully, we are doing well on that front. It has to be sustained. It cannot be a up and down kind of a situation where one day we are up and one day we are down. It has to be a sustained growth over a period of time. The Chinese achieved it over a period of time with an average of 10% at one time,
yeah.
right? They went as high as 14%. They took out 750 million people out of poverty.
Oh, gee.
These are landmark achievements on the economic front, economic social front. This is something that India should be aspiring for, which the world should say. See, India has picked up 500 million people out of poverty, 600 million people out of poverty, right? See its foreign exchange reserves. See the kind of infrastructure development that India is now undertaking. All these kind of things. Then the reputation also goes up because of if you, I would say the best way for our viewers for them to understand this is to go back to 1978, Deng Xiaoping's four modernizations. What were the four modernizations which helped China to actually cross the Rubicon? It started with agriculture to make them self-contained, self-sustained. Number two was technical education, so that the research and development, technologies, etc., could be all in-house. We are good at it. We need to improve on this much more. The third was on manufacturing, right? China chose the manufacturing route and achieved wonders. And because of that, they had an export economy completely, right? And the fourth thing was on the armed forces, which
Mm,
is what adds to the comprehensive national power, overall comprehensive national power. If you take all these four domains which the Chinese emphasized upon, these are the four domains which India needs to today emphasize upon, focus upon. We are to a great extent doing it already, but we need to be more focused, and we need to ensure that we take this in continuity. We can't have a break anyway. Having said that, the intellectual aspect. Remember, even today, the Chinese media, to a great extent, even the many of the Chinese universities today, are not taking out that those kind of analyses, reports, white papers, etc., which the entire world is reading. If they are reading it at all, they're reading it only for the purpose of targeting China, not anything else, right? What India needs to do is to develop an intellectual capital tremendously. One of our biggest complaints in India against ourselves was our lack of intellectual capital. We had no think tanks
mm,
in India. We had one IDSA and we had one ICWA, right? These were the two think tanks in Delhi at one time. The Delhi Policy Group came, the third think tank. Today we are flush with them. And we need to develop a huge intellectual capital, which is already happening. Our media is good, needs to become better. So that the word and the advantage of the English language that we have, we must not lose it. And therefore, to develop this intellectual capital, this will be like a weapon by itself, a non-military methodology of actually domination, of carrying out the Indian message across. All this must happen, and it must happen quickly.
Hmm.
You will find that what you have seen at 2022 as the beginning, with Prime Minister Modi uh, being suddenly put on the pedestal, with his thoughts and ideas, few lines and words spoken by him, uh, will ultimately cascade into something bigger in the future. I foresee this happening in 5 years' time. I'm not hopeful of this happening within a short period of time. If that happens in a very short period of time, it will be very temporary. I want
Yeah.
this more permanent, and it's only through that way that you'll find that we'll be able to sustain these efforts of ours towards becoming a much more respected nation in the comity of nations of the world.
Indeed, sir. I have, of course, viewers who are itching to ask you questions. Guys, before I do, of course, a reminder, all of you, please like this video. Those who are watching right now and in the future, like this video, subscribe to the channel. You can visit my website at thedevtalks.com. And of course, you can find the general by just doing a little Google search. And you'll find a whole list of his articles and his talks around there. Please do watch them because there's some very insightful talks. And of course, the talks that Sir is given on Dev Talks as well. If you can, do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts. Guys, shoot in your questions so that I can ask the general. I have two on my phone with people who've not been able to attend with apologies. One is from the Netherlands and one is from the US. So I will take them up, but I'd like to take this. Thank you, Mr. Bedi, for your contribution. General, how would you like India to become a world leader when after 75 years we are still caught up with debates like submarines versus aircraft carriers, fighter aircraft versus drone, etc.? In such a scenario, how can we plan for 25 years?
See, Channelview, debates actually contribute to the strength of a nation. I agree with you that if you take 75 years to decide something, obviously it doesn't contribute to your strength in any way. But I think we've come far beyond. We've come far beyond. Today we have greater political stability for one. One of our major drawbacks, pre 2014 perhaps, ever since the 80s, was the fact that we had reasonably low political stability, and because of which our decision making was suspect. Secondly, our military culture, should I say strategic culture, was comparatively weak, low. Not to say that it has strengthened or improved greatly today. It is still not at the desirable level, but things have improved a lot. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Important thing is we are a democracy still. Right. Not many nations can boast of that. We are a democracy. We are a functioning, we may call us a chaotic democracy. We are that. Now, no problem in admitting it. So we will take our decisions in our time. I don't think we've done too badly in terms of our strategic decisions. Um, yes, for example, the construction of infrastructure in the northern borders, we perhaps took our decisions 20 years too late or maybe 25 years too late. But we are catching up today. We are allocating a lot of funds for it. Road building technology is a major problem around the world. People don't understand the kind of challenges you have in the Himalayas, but things are definitely improving. And I can assure you of one thing, as a military man, some years ago, I too was very apprehensive of a potential conventional war with China. Today, I'm not at all. Having stepped out of uniform, having traveled the world around, looked around, I find that it's not as if the China man is 10 feet tall. So I think India has got its act together. It's not got its act together in a crash course way, but I think we are definitely on the right course at the moment. It will take us longer than Perhaps it may take many other nations. But I don't think anyone is threatening us to go to war with us in the immediate future. Neither 2023, 24, 25. I don't think the Chinese are going to even risk it after seeing what's happened in Ukraine. They would like to put their focus to Taiwan, where there is no guarantee that they're going to win this war against Taiwan too. And with Japan threatening to militarize itself, the strategic situation in the East Pacific, in the Pacific region in general, is going to change quite drastically in the future. So that's my response to you.
Indeed, sir. Mr. Venki asks, India is passing through both lucky as well as a trifle unlucky period in the current. Lucky because we've survived conditions and come out with flying colors. Unlucky because internal fault lines are being further complicated by our miserable neighborhood and the world at large. Your comments, sir.
See, yes, we have fault lines. We are a diverse nation, and we were very proud of this very famous slogan: diversity, unity in diversity. We need to work on that to make sure that the elements within India who are working against Indian unity, do not succeed in their mission. They are being supported from across the borders. So far, we have not had too much evidence of support from our northern neighbors, but our western neighbors have been at it for the last 40, 50 years. And I dare say that the northern neighbors are also going to step in the near future if they are actually serious about pursuing, threatening threats against India in any time in the future. So they're going to probably fight it on two and a half or three fronts, whichever they wish to pursue. So with that kind of a thing, there's no doubt that we have to live with that problem.
Mm.
Uh, the problem in northern India and eastern India, western, northern, and eastern India, admitted. It can all happen because of northern neighbors, it can happen because of western neighbors. Influence of that traveling into the center of India, the Red Corridor area, etc. But southern India, why should this happen in southern India? Much of it is happening because of the return of a lot of people from the Middle East. Perhaps we need to do more on ascertaining the ideology of people who are returning here. Of course, they're Indian citizens to return here, but I think greater intelligence uh, footprint on south of the Vindhyas may be necessary today to be able to determine anti-national elements who may be establishing their networks, etc., for the future. You're
Mm.
aware the ISIS established a very strong network. It had its one of its major controllers, a chap called Shami Witness, who was operating from Bangalore for 8 months and controlling the ISIS network with nobody knowing. And that's the kind of thing which can happen here also in the near future. So this is something that we should be a little more careful about. No doubt, strengthening of intelligence is the answer for all this. Simultaneously, anyone would say that the best form of defense is offense. As far as the Pakistani side is concerned, on the west, I think we need to make it very clear that two can play this game. How we do it is up to us. But it should become very, very evident that the conditions within Pakistan are such that it is not difficult to play the same game against them that they are playing with us, right? Uh, I dare say this can't happen on the Chinese side because Tibet is different, our borders with China are different, but definitely we need to strengthen ourselves uh, from a conventional angle to such an extent that any appreciation, any analysis that the Chinese armed forces, the PLA, does should give them an answer that carrying out adventurism, military adventurism against India is not going to be worth the effort.
Indeed, that's. I think that's a common feeling, which is, if I may, before I take this question, so I've spoken to many people, uh, General Shankar, General Narayan, General Rakesh Sharma, General Pannu, so many people. Everybody's got this common feeling that you've just elucidated, that the cost must be elucidated to China very clearly. It's
Absolutely.
time that that happens. managing the situation is correct, but the cost escalation must be there to the Chinese now. Anytime something else happens, I think this is a common thing which is coming out. Interestingly, I think all you guys have that analysis, which is very clear that it's time. That timeline has crossed now, which comes out very clearly, sir. Thank you. The question by Bin Hoina Preet: India will have to increase its muscle mass. Once that is done, others will fear and respect us. No questions asked. Soft power comes with hard military abilities.
Well, I think that's an obvious thing. What is being stated is obvious, and it is also obvious that India is pursuing that, single mindedly pursuing it. I mean, you have to just assess what was the situation in 2010 or maybe a little earlier against what it is today in the Ministry of Defense, in the Ministry of External Affairs, the manner in which our assessments are being made, the think tank culture that has emerged, uh, the national security apparatus, so to say, the NSAB, the NSA. Everyone is in a much higher energy kind of a mode at the moment. And therefore, to say that we are not adding muscle may not be entirely correct.
Absolutely, sir. Apart from sustained economic growth, military power, soft power, what is the one thing that India should do right in the next decade for the big leap?
Apart from sustained economic growth, military power, soft power. Okay, so question of what do you define as military power? See, military power has many connotations. In this context, of course, military power obviously means transformation. You need a transformational effort. Technology, weaponry, doctrine, organizational structures, which means essentially theaterization, right? Integration and theaterization. All this has to come together if you want to make a difference, if you want to send home the right message. It can't happen overnight. It takes a fairly long period of time to do it. We are one of those nations who, for example, from 1962 to 1971, in 9 years, we had transformed ourselves completely from a beaten, defeated army to a victorious army. Right? It took us 9 years doing it at that
Can
point.
be done. Hmm.
It can be done today also if we follow the same high spirit and high energy kind of a route that we wish to take. Of course, there cannot be a dearth of funding for it. And mercifully, the government of India is carrying out the required funding, which is there. Of course, you can't get everything that you desire, but the army is making the armed forces are making their point and are getting a large chunk of what they actually need. But I would go one step further and argue that as much as the physical side, soft power side, etc., it is the psychological aspect, knowledge capital. It's not just technology, it is also knowledge on how to apply technology, which is very essential. Essentially, it comes down to doctrine
The spread
and
of
Indian way of war fighting, the Indian doctrine for our terrain, for our areas of concern, etc. It should all be Indianized. And I think that is something which we should pay a lot of attention to in the near future.
This is an interesting comment, and I just want to put it out there. Chakravarti says a former Afghan official once described Pakistan raison d'etre as follows: sit in China's lap, fantasize America, try to wrest Kashmir from India, and create constant trouble in Afghanistan. That was his
Yes,
assessment.
it describes Pakistan rather well.
Very
America,
beautiful.
China, Russia, and who else was it involved? China, India,
Afghanistan, sir.
Afghanistan. Afghanistan. You can add a couple of more nations to it. You can also add Saudi Arabia to it because they have a very special relationship with them, which went slightly awry in the last few years. They've also got an emerging relationship with Russia all of a sudden at the moment, right? Uh, and their interests also extend into Central Asia. So when the statement is a actually half complete statement. It needs to go into various other areas of Pakistan's concern, and it all stems from the fact that Pakistan is one of the geostrategically one of the most important nations of the world. It it occupies a space which I don't think any other nation in the world has got such an important place. Turkey is a very important country because the bridge east to west, Black Sea, Mediterranean, you know, East, surrounded by East Europe, yet a part of NATO. When you look at Turkey, that's a classic example. You could argue and debate, probably the geostrategically one of the most important nations of the world. But if I were to enter into a debate tomorrow, I would still root for Pakistan. Access to heart of Asia into Indian Ocean, access from Indian Ocean to the heart of Asia, access to China, access
Access
from
to India.
China to the Belt and Road Initiative into the Indian Ocean, North Western Indian Ocean, right? Neighboring Afghanistan, neighboring Iran, Shia Iran, Sunni Pakistan, Sunni Saudi Arabia, Persian Gulf, sandwiching Iran, Shia Iran in the middle. I mean, what else can you ask for in terms of your importance, your geostrategic importance?
And
So these statements are very, very obvious and very correct. What has been
if
stated.
Pakistan has his head straight, neighbor of India as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Isaac Singh says, "Sir, do you think India now needs to be more aggressive against China?" Again, I think this is something that you elucidated on in taking the initiative to capture strategic points on the LAC rather than reacting to salami slices as China indulges in it.
Very critical decision. When should India start acting more offensive? Selectively at a particular place, you can build up your superiority like the Chinese built up in Galwan at that particular time. You
Hmm.
can build up your superiority at any place and effect an offensive action. There will be a response to it somewhere else, or there may be a response all along. It will depend at that time how China is placed vis-a-vis the rest of the world, with India, etc. But to come to that point where India has the strategic confidence to do that, you need to have the mass, the backing, the backing, which means essentially your forces should be modernized sufficiently, exercised sufficiently. Which someone spoke about muscle, that muscle should be very, very evident. Then you can experiment. And experiment not for the sake of experiment. You don't go into carrying out an offensive action just for the sake of that. We want to do an offensive action. We have not done an offensive action for long. You don't do it. Every such action has to have an outcome.
Hmm.
Now, you should sit down and in your mind only work it out. What is the likely outcome? What is the outcome that India desires? What is the outcome which is likely to be achieved? What is the response that the Chinese are likely to come out with? Can we counter that response that the Chinese come out with?
Hmm.
And when you've thought through this whole issue, then look at it. बैठकर पीछे suddenly to one day, fine day say, we must take more offensive action against China. ऐसे नहीं होता है. All these decisions have to be backed by something. And that backing is something which you got to analyze in your mind.
Yeah. There's a lot which needs to be done within India to kind of figure this out. Sir, Jain, please elaborate on some challenges that we face with regards to strategic communication, and of course areas of focus in 2023 that you've already covered. But I'd like you to talk about strategic communication, sir.
Largely strategic communication. Firstly, most people don't understand what is strategic communication. It's nothing but an euphemism for what is otherwise known as information warfare, or many times what is called perception management. Right. So it is at strategic level where nations do it to each other. It is at military operational level where armies do it to each other, theaters do it against each other, and lastly, it is tactical and sub-tactical when formations and units do it against each other, right? So there are different levels, and at different levels, it's played out
Hmm.
differently. You
Hmm.
have different tools and instruments to work it out. For example, at the national strategic level, you have the media, the national media. The Chinese play it out with global times, right? The Americans in these days, these times during the Ukraine war, have been playing it out through Washington Post, even through the New York Times, right? Uh, we've got an open media, but under certain circumstances, I'm sure the government of India can always call upon our media to play this game out on their behalf, and they do it many times. To put out the required messaging, to send out the right messaging to impinge on the minds of where the decision making is taking place, right? So, strategic communication is an ongoing thing at all times. The million dollar question in India at the moment is, should it be structured? Like in the United States and other countries, for example, in the UK, they've come out with the famous 77 Brigade, which is the old Chindits Brigade. That
Hmm.
is the information warfare or communication strategy formation of
Yes.
the British Army. You'll be surprised, my dear viewers, will be surprised that India raised the first information warfare brigade 8 years, 9 years before the UK did. We raised it in 2004, right? Nobody knew how to use it. We never thought through it. There wasn't enough literature available in the world. We didn't have the experience of it. So we disbanded the brigade in 2004 and converted it into an EW group, electronic warfare group. And today we are regretting it. We have lost 20 years, 18, 17, 18 years of experience because of that. So we need to structure ourselves better. I'm not recommending here, I don't have the time to recommend to you how these structures should be, but these structures need to be at the apex level, at the operational level, and at the tactical, sub-tactical level. All three places need to be addressed by it.
Absolutely. So I must say this has been a very insightful conversation with some loads of other questions, which of course I can't take. We're touching about 1 hour, but I'd like to ask you one to close this discussion. We've discussed everything from the neighborhood to world politics to India's place in the world to China and the challenges upcoming in front of us. My main and simple question, and this is kind of a feel good factor, and let me just put it out there. Looking us at ourselves 20 years ago and non-politically, so our position in the world was, yeah, India. Today it is India in terms of a certain trust uh, which has come up. We heard certain world leaders talk about us and our diplomacy during the UNGA. That was very heartening to hear. We've heard world leaders reacting to various situations within India and respecting India's opinions and position to various things abroad. That tells us that the value of truth, the value of our position, the way we are, is respected. How do you think we should now take advantage of something like that and go forward into the future? Because that is where India stands and that's India's way.
Yes, a good question, there's no doubt, a well thought through question. But I still think we are at the early stages
Yes, of course.
of developing that reputation. And much of that is coming out of our economic success capability. A lot of it is coming out uh, from the manner in which we've handled the pandemic in particular. Of course, initially it was disastrous. We could have gone completely awry, but we managed to recover and retrieve it. And I think that became a model for the world. Our ability to reach out to the rest of the world and help them in terms of vaccinations, the vaccine, etc., has been very, very helpful. The pharma health sector is something which has contributed tremendously to the Indian reputation per se. Having said all this, perhaps we need to develop maybe one or two other domains. If you remember, the IT domain was one place where we excelled, and much of the West was always dependent on India for this. Uh, for vaccine and for pharma, much of the world has been dependent on us because of the cheaper pharma that we have been able to produce and put out. Right. I would be very happy to see intellectual capital develop out of India. Research and development, intellectual capital. Our IITs have been outstanding, absolutely. Besides the IITs, we need to go into other universities with studying the arts, studying economics and social subjects and things like that. That once you find that that knowledge capital is respected, your corporate capability is respected, automatically things start falling into place. One thing is business. You're doing good business, but corporate excellence, ability to convert this into excellence. I think this will take time, but we are right on the right path. It's very important that we maintain our social reputation in the world. So I
Mm.
repeat, the aspect of unity in diversity. Let that not come into question at any stage. Let not the world point fingers at us because of an incident here or an incident there. That we should be extremely conscious about. And we are being conscious of it at the moment. I only hope that we shall sustain that effort of being conscious towards that kind of situation.
So that is an insightful answer. Of course, miles to go before we sleep, and there's no question about it. We are in a position where we could change our lives and change our lives for the betterment of the world and ourselves, of course. Let's not be so danveer that we forget ourselves, but we need to look inwards. We need to do a lot of things that need to be done in terms of our internal strength. And thank you so much for elucidating that very, very clearly, sir. This has been an honor, and actually, one of the last sessions of the year to understand where India stood in 2022. Guys, thank you so much for joining in on the last minute. I know I just told you guys about 15, 20 minutes before, but I'm glad to have the people that I have with me and some great questions. And of course, sir, as usual, it is amazing talking to you, learning from you, and looking forward for many, many more sessions in the coming new year of 2023. Wish you and your family a great and a very, very happy new year and great health and success in the next year coming, sir.
That goes from my side to you and to the viewers, all our viewers here. It's been a delight to be on your program for much of the year. I promise to be more often. I think this has been a delightful program. So thank you once again and wishing you all a great 2023. God bless and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir.